My name is David Craiglow, and this is my presentation of the brand voice for business storytelling and brand development. I'm currently completing my master's degree at Full Sail University. This is not a product. It is a belief that freedom trumps all else and that life has no meaning or purpose without the ability to express oneself freely. I will be doing a brand voice for the Blaze Internet News Service and Blaze TV. The Blaze is owned and operated by popular radio talk show host Glenn Beck. Glenn has been around broadcasting all of his adult life. 12 years ago, Glenn changed his radio persona from music DJ to talk radio show host. Soon, Glenn gained prominence with the syndication numbering in the triple digits. He worked at CNN for a short time before he was offered the 5 o'clock hour at Fox News. After a couple of years, Glenn felt he was being too controlled with respect to his content, so he did the unthinkable. He left Fox News, walking away from millions of dollars in a very successful TV show. Keeping his radio program intact, he announced that he would be starting a new TV network called GBTV, available only on the internet. At first, he was confident that eventually other providers would offer the network. He was ridiculed mercilessly for simply wanting to give the audience the truth. But now Glenn is getting the last word. GBTV is up and running and has adopted a new name, the Blaze TV, a news media site dedicated to the truth. This is where the significance of my brand voice comes in, albeit unique in that this is a man who captured the attention of an entire planet without ever uttering a word. Seen here in this rare shot taken at ground level, we know very little about him, but then again, he was only the messenger, not the message. He is known only as the Tank Man. The faces you are about to see become a composite of what the Tank Man has represented for over 20 years. It was June of 1989. Thousands of college students gathered in Beijing's Tiananmen Square to call for a more Western-style democracy, freedom of speech, and honesty in the state-run and reported news. At first, there seemed to be a burgeoning solidarity between the students, and the government, and the soldiers of the PLA. This was a peaceful demonstration to bring attention to the imbalance of life in China and the communist government's disregard for human rights. The students were unafraid and often gladly offered the soldiers cigarettes and drinks, hoping to convince the government that the demonstration was one of a patriotic nature. Perhaps somewhere in the crowded streets, the Tank Man participated in the effort. Bearing signs in English, Mandarin, and Chinese, they cheered on the soldiers, unaware of the turmoil and the fear developing within the hierarchy of the Chinese officials. It is unclear whether the demonstration was planned to correspond with the arrival of the Russian President Gorbachev, but the timing was becoming an embarrassment for the Chinese officials. Suddenly, the students began to realize the PLA was beginning to mobilize in a way that suggested the government may be planning to initiate martial law. Soon, ordinary citizens began to occupy the streets surrounding Tiananmen Square in hopes of slowing the army's progress. The debates began among the students over whether to obey the order to withdraw or hold on to their ground. In any case, it was increasingly apparent that they had the government's attention. Initially, having met so much resistance, the soldiers turned around, but this further outraged the already embittered Chinese officials, and the soldiers were directed to begin clearing the streets. Those soldiers that did not comply would be dealt with harshly. The students and the citizens increased their numbers, and soon the soldiers realized they were caught in the middle of a horrible situation. The soldiers were reluctant to fire on their own people. Many attempts were made to peacefully clear the square, but the students felt that that would be a victory for the government and decided to institute a hunger strike to further the cause they felt was being ignored. The fear and paranoia of the Chinese officials began to swell exponentially. The Russian president was forced to use a side entrance, and the demonstrators now were ruling the airwaves. Now, after nearly 2 weeks of martial law, the event culminated in one bloody night. The demonstrators that agreed to leave were allowed safe passage only to have the escorting soldiers turn and fire on them indiscriminately. Those that chose to stay in the square were systematically murdered by gunfire and run down by tanks and APCs. The citizens tried to fight back, but it was to no avail. The following day, the PLA had made quick work of cleaning up the bodies and burning them. These peaceful demonstrators, numbering in the tens of thousands, were slaughtered and maimed mercilessly. Blood not yet dry and human pulp stained the street, and tanks literally danced in triumph over the disbanded demonstrators in the empty streets. Then suddenly a single freedom fighter stepped out onto the empty street alone. The Tank Man was alone and unyielding. The tanks tried to go around, but he would step in front. Bystanders must have thought he was crazy for stepping out, having witnessed the carnage of the night before, but this solitary man embodied everything they had spent the last few weeks fighting for: freedom, truth, patriotism, and the love of country that went far beyond the fear of death. The tank man was heard saying as he climbed on the forward tank, "You stop this. You have left our country in a chaotic state. We are peaceful and you do not belong here. Go home." Cautious cameramen and residents of the nearby buildings peered out to see this suffering sporadic gunfire from below. All were certain this brave man would be silenced at any moment, but he was not. Instead, he climbed back down from the tank and continued to impede the progress of the column. In his defiance, we are reminded what sacrifices were made to create our own freedoms in the United States. We cannot fathom what this man must be thinking or experiencing, knowing that at any second a single report from a tanker's pistol can end his life. Today, the press is like the people whom cower in the shadows. In fact, this is the voice the press should have. Americans and people all over the world were moved by the stance this man took. We cannot know for sure what he said, and it is of no relevance, for his actions speak louder than any words. The tank man did not care what others thought or how many cameras were watching him. He only cared about justice, freedom, and basic human rights. While we are left to wonder where he came from, what he did for a living, what his name was, and what he had in those bags he so fervently waved at death staring him in the face, we do know what he stood for on a street where the blood of the day before was not yet completely dry. We cannot help but hope the tank man is still out there somewhere, quietly living out his life, knowing that when it mattered he stood, the world watched, the tanks came to a stop, and if only for a moment the world stood still and learned the power of one voice. Without saying a word publicly, he became a voice for thousands of people that died the night before. Who better to be a brand voice for media based on honesty, patriotism, and freedom for all?